I never thought my world would crumble in the dead of night, in our own garage. The scene before me was like a twisted nightmare. There, entangled in the backseat of our family car, were Ethan and Grace, my husband and sister. The pain of betrayal struck me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. My name is Ava Carter, a 28-year-old nurse, married to the man I thought was the love of my life. Ethan was my high school classmate, someone I barely knew back then, but when he re-entered my life years later, he came as a whirlwind romance that I naively believed was fate. Our love is real, Ava, Ethan's words echoed in my mind, now a cruel joke in the face of his betrayal. Our love story began innocently enough. Ethan approached me after graduation, his charm and attentiveness sweeping me off my feet. He was the popular guy in school, the kind that every girl dreamed of. But me? I was just Ava, the quiet one. His interest in me was baffling, yet intoxicating. Why me? I had asked him once, my insecurities surfacing. Because I fell in love, he replied, his gaze holding mine, convincing and sincere. Or so I thought. The doubt I carried was partly due to my sister, Grace. Beautiful, outgoing, and the polar opposite of me. She was the one who always shone, effortlessly attracting attention. When I turned to her for advice about Ethan, her words were encouraging, yet somehow patronizing. He's serious about you. Who would chase a girl for months for a fling? She had said, her words tinted with a hint of condescension. I wanted to believe her, to believe that someone could truly love me for me. Ethan's kindness in our first year together only solidified my trust. He was the perfect boyfriend, showering me with attention and surprises. Every anniversary, every birthday was a celebration of our love. But after we got married, everything changed. Can't you at least help with the cleaning? It's your house too, I pleaded with Ethan on countless occasions. He earned less than me, spending most of his time idly while I worked exhausting shifts at the hospital. But he shrugged off my requests, his once sweet words turning into sharp retorts. You're the one who's good at it, he'd say, his voice laced with annoyance. The emotional toll was immense. My once fairy tale romance had turned into a draining, one-sided relationship. Ethan's transformation from a loving partner to a freeloader was gradual but relentless. The worst part? I started believing that maybe it was my fault, that maybe I wasn't enough. That night, the night I caught them, was supposed to be like any other. I woke up to find Ethan's side of the bed cold and empty. A sense of unease led me to the garage, where I heard them before I saw them. The sight of Ethan and Grace together shattered any illusions I had left. Be gentle, Ethan, Grace's voice was a whisper, but to me it was a scream that tore through my heart. I stood there, frozen, as the truth revealed itself in the most horrifying way. They didn't see me. They were too lost in their own world of deceit. I closed the garage quietly, locking them in their den of betrayal. Rushing to my parents' house, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. My parents and Mark, Grace's unsuspecting husband, were waiting, their expressions grim. Mark held a recording device in his hand, and the voices of Ethan and Grace filled the room, discussing their affair with a casual cruelty that made my skin crawl. I knew then what I had to do. Revenge was the only path left for me. I wanted them to feel the pain they inflicted, to understand the depth of their betrayal, and I was ready to do whatever it took to make that happen. Let's make them pay, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, and so the plan for retribution began. As the sun peeked through the curtains the next morning, my resolve hardened. The man I had loved, Ethan, was nothing but a mask, and Grace, my sister, a serpent in disguise. I replayed their secret conversations, each word a dagger to my heart. You're just too good at this, Ethan. Grace's voice from the recording mocked me. Ethan's laughter followed. Only for you, Grace. The memories of our relationship, once sweet, now turned bitter. Ethan and I had started as friends, and his pursuit seemed so genuine. He was the popular one, the golden boy, while I remained in the background, unnoticed. His sudden interest in me was like a dream come true. I was flattered, overwhelmed, and eventually in love. Why me? I had asked him more than once. Because you're different, Ava. You're real, Ethan had said, looking into my eyes with such intensity that I believed him. That belief was my downfall. But Grace, she was the epitome of confidence and allure. She had always been the center of attention, effortlessly stealing the spotlight. When Ethan came into my life, Her advice was laced with subtle jabs, undermining my self-esteem while pretending to be supportive. "Take a chance, Ava. Ethan seems different," she urged, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I remembered how Ethan's behavior started changing after our marriage. The sweet gestures and thoughtful surprises became rarer, replaced by indifference and neglect. I was left to manage everything, from household chores to finances, while Ethan lounged around, his job at his father's company more of a time pass than a career. "We need to support each other, Ethan. Can't you see I'm struggling?" I had pleaded with him countless times. "You knew I wasn't the domestic type," was his cold reply. My efforts to involve him in our life were met with resistance and anger. His once loving words turned into harsh criticisms, his hands, once gentle, now raised in threat. I remembered the fear, the sense of walking on eggshells around my own husband. "You're better off doing it yourself. You don't want me to mess it up, do you?" Ethan's words were a constant reminder of my supposed inadequacy. The realization that it was all a charade to get close to Grace hit me like a tidal wave. Their affair wasn't just a fleeting moment of weakness. It was planned, nurtured in deceit. They used my love, my trust, as a stepping stone for their sordid affair. Grace's words from the recording played in my mind. "I've always admired how easily you manipulate, Ethan." His response was a chilling confession. "And I admire your ability to play the innocent sister." The plan for revenge took shape in my mind, clear and precise. I couldn't let them get away with their treachery. They needed to understand the pain they had caused, the lives they had shattered. It was time for their facade of love to come crashing down. "I will make them regret every lie, every deceit," I whispered to myself, a vow that I intended to keep. The morning light did nothing to ease the storm inside me. As I sat with Mark, my parents, and the recording, a plan began to take shape. It was more than just a need for revenge. It was a quest for justice, for exposing the lies that Ethan and Grace had woven so skillfully. "Did you know about this, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I had my suspicions," Mark confessed, his eyes dark with pain, "but I never imagined the depth of their betrayal." My parents, always supportive, looked at me with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "We're here for you, Ava, whatever you need," my father said, his voice firm. It was a surreal moment, hearing the supportive words of my family while grappling with the betrayal of those I had loved. Ethan's true nature was a bitter pill to swallow. He was no longer the man I married, but a stranger with a charming facade. Our anniversary, it was all a lie, wasn't it? The words tumbled out of me, a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "He never cared about the marriage, Ava. It was all a game to him." Mark's voice was heavy with unspoken emotions. The conversation shifted to the specifics of our revenge. It had to be meticulous, leaving no room for Ethan and Grace to escape the consequences of their actions. "We need to hit them where it hurts the most," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Financially and socially," Mark added, his mind already strategizing. The plan was simple yet effective. We would use the evidence of the affair to ruin their reputation. Ethan's job at his father's company would be the first target. With the recording and my testimony, it would be easy to convince his father of Ethan's true character. "Grace won't get away with this either," I said, a cold determination settling over me. Mark nodded. "I'll file for divorce and make sure she doesn't get a penny." The thought of confronting them was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wanted to see the shock on their faces when they realized their world was crumbling. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. "Let's do it. Let's bring them down," I declared, my voice filled with a newfound strength. My parents agreed, their support unwavering. "We'll stand by you, Ava. Always," my mother said, her eyes glistening with tears. The meeting ended with a plan in place. It was time for Ethan and Grace to face the consequences of their actions. They thought they could use me and get away with it. They were wrong. I would make sure of that. The day unfolded with a tense anticipation. I waited for the moment when Ethan and Grace would realize their carefully constructed world of lies was about to collapse. My heart raced with a mix of fear and vindictive satisfaction. In the late afternoon, the confrontation took place. Ethan and Grace, looking disheveled and confused after being released from the garage, were summoned to my parents' house. They walked in, not knowing that their lives were about to change irrevocably. "What the hell, Ava? Why did you lock us in there?" Ethan's voice was filled with anger and confusion. Grace added, her voice dripping with feigned innocence, "Ava, we were worried sick about you. Why did you run off like that?" Their acting was almost convincing, but I knew better. "You're worried about me? That's rich, coming from you two," I replied, my voice cold and unwavering. Mark stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We know about the affair. All of it." Ethan and Grace exchanged a panicked look, their masks of concern quickly dissolving. "You have no proof," Ethan blurted out, his voice betraying his fear. "That's where you're wrong," Mark said, pulling out the recording device. The voices of Ethan and Grace filled the room, their intimate conversation echoing off the walls. The color drained from their faces as they listened to their own words, their affair laid bare for all to hear. This is illegal. You can't record us like that." Grace stammered, her composure shattered. I stepped closer, my anger boiling over. "You think that matters now, after everything you've done? You used me, Ethan. You used our marriage to get to my sister. And you, Grace, how could you do this to me? To Mark?" My voice was a mixture of rage and heartache. Ethan's defiance crumbled, replaced by a desperate plea. "Ava, please, I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." "And you, Grace? What's your excuse?" I demanded, my gaze fixed on her. Grace's eyes darted around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. "It was a mistake, Ava. I never meant to hurt you." "A mistake? You call an ongoing affair a mistake?" My words were sharp, cutting through the room. Mark intervened, his voice calm but firm. "The marriage is over, Grace. I've already filed for divorce. And as for you, Ethan, your father will know about this. I doubt he'll want a son-in-law who cheats on his daughter with her own sister." Ethan's face went pale, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. Grace began to sob, her tears failing to elicit sympathy from anyone in the room. "You two deserve each other," I said, the finality in my voice marking the end of the chapter that had been Ethan and Grace in my life. As they left, their pleas and cries echoing behind them, I felt a sense of closure. The path ahead would be challenging, but at least it would be free from their deceit. The revenge was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the confrontation left a bitter taste in my mouth. Ethan and Grace had left, their facades of innocence shattered. But it wasn't enough. The depth of their betrayal demanded more than just a revelation. It required retribution. Sitting around the dining table with Mark and my parents, we plotted our next moves. The air was thick with a sense of righteous anger, a collective desire to see justice served. "We need to ensure they truly understand the consequences of their actions," Mark said, his voice resolute. I nodded in agreement. "They can't just walk away from this unscathed." My father, usually a man of few words, spoke up. "Ethan's employment at his father's company is his lifeline. If he loses that, he loses everything." A plan began to form, one that involved not just exposing Ethan's infidelity to his family, but also highlighting his manipulative nature. His father, a respected businessman, would not tolerate such a scandal. "And what about Grace?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with disappointment and disgust for her own daughter. "Her social standing, her lifestyle, it all hinges on her marriage to Mark," I said. "Once the divorce is finalized and the details of her infidelity become public, she'll lose it all." Mark nodded. "I'll make sure the divorce settlement leaves her with nothing. She won't be able to charm her way out of this." The conversation turned to the logistics of our plan. Mark had contacts who could expedite the divorce and ensure the affair was made public. My father knew people in the business community who would ensure Ethan's disgrace was well known. It was a meticulous plan, cold and calculated, but it was justified. Ethan and Grace had played with our lives, and now they would face the repercussions. "Are you sure about this, Ava?" my mother asked, concern in her eyes. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "They need to learn that actions have consequences. They can't just use people and expect to get away with it." As we finalized our plan, I felt a sense of empowerment. For too long, I had been the victim of their deceit, but now I was taking control. Ethan and Grace would soon learn the true cost of their betrayal, and I would be there to witness their fall. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as our plan was set into motion. Mark, with his connections, expedited the divorce proceedings and ensured that the details of Grace's infidelity became public knowledge. The reaction was immediate and scathing. Grace, once a social butterfly, found herself ostracized, her friends turning their backs on her in disgust. Meanwhile, my father used his influence to spread the word about Ethan's behavior. Soon enough, the scandal reached his father's ears. The disappointment and anger in his father's voice were palpable when he called Ethan for a meeting. "I cannot believe you would stoop so low, Ethan," his father had said, according to what I heard later. "You have not only shamed yourself, but our entire family." Ethan's pleas fell on deaf ears. His father, a man of principles, could not overlook such a grave transgression. Ethan was promptly removed from his position in the company, his future in tatters. As for Grace, the reality of her situation hit her hard. The luxurious life she had enjoyed was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her husband, whom she had deceived, was now her ex-husband, and he made sure she left the marriage with nothing but her personal belongings. The day of reckoning came when I encountered Ethan and Grace together, looking defeated and desperate. They had come, hoping for some form of forgiveness, a chance to explain themselves. "Ava, please, you have to understand," Ethan began, his voice trembling. "You don't get to ask for understanding, Ethan. Not after everything you've done," I cut him off, my voice cold and unyielding. Grace was next, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ava, I'm your sister. Please, can't we just talk about this?" "You ceased to be my sister the moment you betrayed me," I said, the finality in my voice leaving no room for argument. They tried to plead, to reason, but it was useless. The damage was done, their actions irredeemable. They had played a dangerous game and lost everything. "You both made your choices, and now you have to live with them," I said, turning away from their pleas. As I walked away, leaving them behind, I felt a sense of closure. The weight of their betrayal would no longer hold me down. They had received their due punishment, and I could finally move on. Ethan and Grace had thought they could manipulate those around them without consequence. But they were wrong. They learned the hard way that deceit and treachery come at a price they would now pay for the rest of their lives. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. Ethan and Grace, now pariahs, faced the harsh reality of their choices. Their fall from grace was a tale whispered in hushed tones among our acquaintances, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of betrayal and deceit. Meanwhile, I found myself in a period of reflection. The intense emotions that had fueled my desire for revenge gave way to a quiet introspection. I had sought justice, and in many ways I had achieved it. Yet the victory was bittersweet. There was no joy in seeing the downfall of people I once loved, only a profound sense of loss and a desire to move forward. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine and the sense of purpose it brought. My colleagues noticed the change in me, a newfound strength and resilience that had emerged from the ashes of my old life. One day, after a particularly grueling shift, I sat down with a close friend and coworker, Lisa, who had been a pillar of support through everything. "You look different, Ava. Stronger," she commented, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and admiration. "I had to be," I replied, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "I couldn't let them destroy me." Lisa nodded, understanding. "And now, what's next for Ava Carter?" I smiled, a genuine smile that had been absent for too long. "I start living for myself. I rebuild, but this time on my own terms." The path to healing wasn't straightforward. There were days when anger and sadness threatened to overwhelm me, but with each passing day they became less potent. I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had lost in my marriage, my independence, my strength, and my capacity for joy. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. Ethan and Grace became distant memories, occasional whispers in the wind that no longer had the power to hurt me. My relationship with my parents and Mark grew stronger, forged in the fires of adversity. We had faced a storm together, and it had brought us closer. As for love, I was cautious. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they were healing. I knew that someday I would be ready to open my heart again, but for now, I was content in finding peace within myself. Sitting in the park one sunny afternoon, watching the world go by, I realized that I had come a long way. The journey had been painful, filled with trials and tribulations, but it had led me to a place of understanding and acceptance. I had learned that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, was not a path to true happiness. True strength lay in forgiveness, in the ability to let go of the past and embrace the future. As I looked up at the clear blue sky, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that the best was yet to come. The past could not be changed, but the future was mine to write. And with that thought, I stood up, ready to face whatever life had in store for me, with a heart that was healing and a spirit that was unbroken.